What you need to know is that salvation is by faith and faith alone in Jesus Christ. And faith alone in Jesus Christ is preceded and followed by repentance. A turning away from sin, a hatred for the things that God hates and a love for the things that God loves. A growing in holiness and a desire not to be like Britney Spears, not to be like the world, and not to be like the great majority of American Christians, but to be like Jesus Christ. I don't know why you're clapping. I'm talking about you.
Worship Christ because He's God. He's not like God. He's not close to God. He's not almost God. Jesus Christ is God.
Once I turned to Jesus and I realized how He had changed my outlook on life, not just softball, but understanding how much I have to live for, and that's living to exemplify the kingdom.
The Holy Spirit's in Elijah. The Holy Spirit's in Elisha. The Holy Spirit's in John the Baptizer. The Holy Spirit is in Jesus Christ. The Holy Spirit is in you if you belong to Jesus.
Let me have Christ whether I'm sick or well. Let me have Christ whether I'm rich or poor. Let me have Christ whether I'm alive or dead. Let me have Christ for my sins, and Christ for my guide, and Christ for my power, and Christ for my king.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back here Monday night, and it's another episode of the Bible Lens podcast. It's going to be a two-man show. The two J's are taking over here tonight because I'm here, Jacob, for Society Reviews. My good buddy Johnny's here with me as well. How you doing, Johnny?
Can't complain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this one's going to be a pretty heavy one. We're talking about what everyone in the world is seemingly talking about right now. A couple weeks ago, as you all know, there was an incident in Israel that sparked a whole bunch of violence, really horrific things that happened there, and it's only snowballed over the course of the last couple of weeks, and now people are taking sides. They're marching in the streets with flags, and I've been sitting back on this one. I didn't want to say anything right as everything was going on because, you know, you say the wrong thing, people want to get you in trouble, they want to get you fired, they want like all these crazy stuff. So I was like, you know what, let's just sit this for about a week or so and then see how, you know, the winds go. And I wanted to give as much of an in-depth conversation about this topic. And look, if we're talking about Israel and Palestine, which is kind of the whole conflict we're talking about here, we can do an entire 6-month series about this whole thing because there's so many different aspects of this story to talk about. But instead of covering everything, which we won't be doing tonight because we only have a certain amount of time, my focus for tonight's episode is how should Christians, Bible-believing Christians, view the Israel and Hamas conflict. So, and I've seen a lot of commentary over the course of the last few weeks from people who are Christian, some who are claimed to be Christian, and the reaction is surprisingly varied about this issue because obviously there's people who say that we need to support Israel at all costs, obviously. Then you have people out there that are like, no, Israel is not our ally. We should not be siding with them. And some people have such a hatred for Israel that they're unironically siding with Hamas, and they're Christians. So I wanted to really just dig into this context from a Christian perspective and look at how we should be looking at this whole conflict. And is this a signal of essentially the end times? If you remember, for the last couple of months, we've been talking about Revelation. We've been talking about the players in the book of Revelation. Is this essentially the pregame of the book of Revelation, the 7-year tribulation? Are we witnessing the beginning of the last days here? This is kind of what we're going to talk about with you tonight, Johnny. So I'm glad that you're here with me because you you have a lot you can bring into this topic here, but I guess we should start off with a very generalized question before getting into any real context here. And it's just from a Christian perspective, how do you view the conflict here between Israel and Hamas? Like, what kind of your thoughts on essentially both sides and the take of what this war is actually all about, and whose side do you really take on the war?
I think at its core, it's what you would call a holy war. Um, even from the beginning, Hamas stated uh that the reason they went and invaded Jerusalem, or invaded Israel rather, was because the Jews were Judaizing the Temple Mount and threatening the existence of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So whether you believe that's the real reason why they went in or just a facade, it's at least one part of this is a holy war, meaning that like it's kind of one religion, one worldview versus another. I think, and that's kind of one of the core reasons of that, is because both Muslims and Jews and Christians all claim that Jerusalem and a lot of the surrounding land is holy for them for various reasons.
Mm-hmm. And this is really what it comes down to. I mean, this is essentially a turf war, and it's a turf war that you can argue that there are people on both sides that just want to eliminate the other side, and this is kind of what we're looking at here with this conflict. And the way that I look at it, if you're trying to look at it from a purely Christian perspective, the way that I look at this is that you have to understand that there's a plan that is happening, that is unfolding with this region, with this war. I look at it as something that has to happen and that is going to happen in order for us to get to the final days. But you also have to have the context of, from a Christian perspective, both of these two sides that are fighting right now, at least at the moment, they're not necessarily friends to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let's just put it that way. So let's kind of rewind here, and I can go and kind of like make my case here. 2 weeks ago, or a little over 2 weeks ago, there was an attack by Hamas in Israel, and we saw the videos of what happened. There was some kind of festival going on in South Israel, and we saw Hamas terrorists essentially paraglide into the region. People were being kidnapped, people were being killed, tortured. There was a lot of videos, a lot of pictures that I'm pretty sure a lot of people saw on the internet. Some very, very horrific stuff that happened, and as a result of that, Israel has been on the attack pretty much ever since that event happened. And they've been targeting the Gaza Strip, they've been targeting Hamas, and there's been a lot of hatred on both sides of this issue. And then there's a lot of hatred from people outside of the direct line of this issue for various reasons, and I'll kind of talk about that as we go on tonight here. But if you listen to our Revelation series, which I believe was episode I think it was 4 through 10, it was when we talked about Revelations, and we talked about the major players in the end times. And what I believe the major players to be is the side of the Antichrist, the side of the whore of Babylon, and of course the Jews, because they all play a pivotal role on how this whole thing is going to pan out. Now, keep in mind, when we talked about all of these sides involved, these are not sides that are particularly friends of the Christian religion or friends of Jesus Christ in general, right? But they all play a significant portion of what's going to happen here. And if you go back and listen to what we talked about a few weeks back, we very much believe, based on the evidence that we went through over a couple episodes about the Mahdi, about the Muslim Jesus, the Dajjal, that look, if you look at the book of Revelations, which was written almost 500 years before Muhammad's first revelation, it's very, very clear there that some demonic entity has completely inverted the book of Revelations to convince the Muslim people that these entities that are being warned about in the Bible are somehow the heroes of the Muslim religion. This is how we got Islam. So we're going to get into a little bit more deeper context of kind of the birth of the Muslim people here in just a second. We're going to start reading Genesis here. So we understand that side. Obviously, the Roman Catholic Church, we're not really playing a direct role in this conflict, at least not yet, but we do believe that they are the whore of Babylon, and we do believe that they'll have a union with the Antichrist side in the final days. Then you have the Jews, right? And we all know that the Jews play a very pivotal role in those end times. We know that there's going to be a elect group of Jews, 144,000 from each tribes of Israel, who are going to be on the side of Jesus Christ in the final days. However, that's not exactly what the case is right now. A lot of Jews, both in Israel and here in the United States, are not fans of Jesus Christ, are not fans of the Christian gospel. They view Jesus Christ as a blasphemer. They view him as someone who tried to pervert the Jewish religion. And a lot of them don't think very kindly of Jesus Christ when it's all said and done. So when you look at the core of this battle that's going on overseas at the moment, at the real cusp of it, you're looking at two sides that have completely rejected the Jesus Christ of the Bible. And that's really what it comes down to. You have two sides that have rejected who Jesus Christ is. You have two sides who rejected everything that Jesus Christ taught. And one of those big things that he taught was to love thy neighbor, the kind of the combination of, the old Jewish law, love your neighbor like yourself, and love your enemies. But because both sides reject that message, they're essentially at a war with each other, which has been going on since quite literally the beginning of time. I mean, since these two nations have existed, these two groups have existed, they have been at war with each other, they have been killing each other, they have been murdering each other, and they continue to this very day because both sides have rejected Jesus Christ, at least for now. So I kind of want to, like I said, there's a few things that we need to talk about before we really get into the deeper sides of what's going on here. And I wanted to start off talking about kind of the history of the Jewish nation as well as the Islamic nation as well. But first, let me give you a quick little shout out to everyone joining us here in the chat right now. Some of you guys are already going in pretty hot here. Duke Nukem is here right now. Says, I find it ironic that the Jews are behaving like Nazis in Germany. The oppressed have become the oppressor. Like I said, we'll talk about this as the show goes on here tonight. He says that he doesn't want any more. Well, hopefully no one should want war at the moment. Kate also joining us here tonight, saying that she defers to the line of Treebird. My stance is I'm on nobody's side because nobody's on my side. Like I said, we'll cover this as the show goes on here. Excalibur joining us here tonight. Did you hear about Iran targeting the U.S.? Yeah, there was a video that I saw just a few minutes ago before we went live here, and Biden was essentially making an address, and he had to leave in the middle of his press conference saying that he needed to go to the Situation Room. Now, I'm not sure if he was supposed to tell us that he's going to the Situation Room, but apparently there's something going on that Biden needed to attend to right now. So we don't know where that story is going to progress, but it's been rumored ever since the original attack on Israel that there could be agents linked to Hamas that are just waiting to start causing some trouble in some other countries, including here in the United States as well. So we'll cover that here. Elon Musk said we're basically sleepwalking our way to World War III. We could already be there. Who knows? But so in order to understand how this whole thing started, we need to go all the way back to the book of Genesis. And Genesis is such a key book when it comes to if you're a Christian, because there's a lot of questions that people have about, how do we all get here? What is our purpose? Like, why is it that this group exists? Why is it that this group exists? Why does that everyone speak a different language? Why is everyone in a different race? And all of these questions are answered in the book of Genesis, but there's very few people out here who believe the book of Genesis to be the truth of how the world started and how everything started. Even there's some Christians, believe it or not, that believe that a lot of the stuff in Genesis is only, spiritual, it's only allegorical. It's not literally God telling you how the world happened and how we got to this point to begin with. So if you're a Christian and you haven't read Genesis, maybe you don't believe all of Genesis, you really need to go back and read this book, because a lot of your questions can't be answered just simply by reading this. But I want to start off talking about Genesis 16, and then we'll hop over to 17 as well. So we're jumping a little bit ahead here. This is a story about Abraham. You guys know the context of Abraham and his wife Sarah. So this is a this is a story that's kind of happening a little bit midway here, but this is going to explain a lot of things, especially about this conflict here. So we're going to read 16 1 through 12 here real quick. It says, now Sarah, to keep in mind, there it says right here Sarai and Abraham, but obviously their names are going to change later on. But for the sake of this argument, I'm just going to call them Sarah and Abraham, just so there's no confusion. But so Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant who was named Hagar. And Sarah, who said to Abraham, see, now the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid, and perhaps I shall chain children by her. And Abraham heeded the voice of Sarah. Then Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband, Abraham, to be his wife. And after Abraham had dwelt in 10 years in the land of Canaan, he went into Hagar, and she conceived. Now, when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Then Sarah said to Abraham, my wrong be upon you. I gave you my maid into your embrace, and when I saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and you. So Abraham said to Sarah, indeed your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please. But when Sarah dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. Now the angel of the Lord found her by the spring in the water into the wilderness, and the spring, it said, by the spring onto the way of Sur. And he said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going? And she said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress, Sarah. And then the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. And that the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants increasingly, so that you shall not be counted for her magnitude. And then the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call him Ishmael. And because the Lord has heard your affliction, he shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand shall be against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all of his brethren. So a few things I need to be pointing out here just with this passage here alone. Then we'll jump over to 17 to give you guys a little bit more context here. But so when you're looking at this story, you have Abraham, who a lot of people say that, you know, they're the religion of Abraham. So this is kind of where the whole distinction in the whole fight between the religions starts here. He had a wife named Sarah, but obviously Sarah couldn't bear him any children. So in an act of impatience, he decided that he was going to essentially marry his Egyptian maidservant named Hagar and have a son with her instead, right? And this obviously caused conflicts for the obvious reasons between Sarah and Hagar, which kind of was a precursor to what we would see here with the religions of both the Jews and the Arabs, or essentially the fight between the Jews and the Arabs, is that even at its very distinction, at its very starting point with these three individuals, there was always a conflict, there was always dissension, and there was always essentially just a sense of unsettledness between these two allies. So I wanted to jump down here. Now, keep in mind, when you talk about the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, a lot of people make this reference that the angel of the Lord is in fact essentially a spiritual version of God himself, right? And a lot of people say that because the angel of the Lord is a representation of the second person in the Trinity, that a lot of people will attribute the angel of the Lord to be Jesus Christ himself. So this, you have to look at it from the perspective of this is essentially Jesus Christ before he was born from Mary, talking to Abraham, talking to Sarah, and talking to Hagar here. And he's telling them right out of the bat that you're going to give birth to a son named Ishmael, and a lot of people link back Ishmael as, you know, the birth of the Arab religion. And he's saying that, you know, he heard your affliction, and he should be a wild man, and he shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. Saying that this son was going to essentially breed a entire race of people that were going to create conflict, not only with the people around him, but their brothers, his direct brother himself, which would be Isaac. And obviously Isaac is the descendant that's directly related to the Jewish nation. So essentially what you're seeing here is that Going all the way back to Abraham, you've had the Jews and the Arabs have always had a relationship, a brother-like relationship here, but it's always been a very, very hectic one. It's always been a very violent one. It's always been one of turmoil and torment, and nothing has really changed in how many thousands of years that we're talking about here. But this is kind of the jump off point of the understanding between the conflict of these two ethnicities here, I guess you can say. So I do want to jump over
real quick before we transition. I want to jump in here and add one thing. Back in Genesis 16:5, Sarah kind of curses Abraham, and she says, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maidservant into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes." That word "wrong," if in the Hebrew, is pronounced Hamas, and that may be a curse right there on Abraham's descendants, or and specifically Ishmael and his bloodline, which is why God declares Ishmael and his bloodline to be, a wild man, every man against him and him against every other.
Yeah. And I do want to just jump over to Genesis 17 because there's just a little bit of a follow up here of what we just talked about in 16. So I want to make sure that you guys can see this too. So I'll make it just a little bit bigger so you guys can see it on here. But it says that Abraham, this is Abraham talking to God now. So we're jumping just a little bit ahead, but this is important context here. Abraham said to God, "Oh, Ishmael might live before you." And then God said, "No, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful. He will multiply exceedingly. He shall beget the 12 princes, and I shall make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, who Sarah bare to you, is set at this set time next year." And then he finished talking with him, and God went up from Abraham. So what he's hearing here is that God is establishing a covenant here with Isaac. He's also saying that he was going to bless Ishmael and make sure that he essentially that his and his descendants will be fruitful and multiply and be blessed exceedingly, right? But keep in mind, the covenant here is being made with Isaac. So this is where the dissension lies between the two religions of the Jewish and the Arab, because the Jewish believe that their covenant here was established with God through Isaac. However, in let's just say later revelations, we'll call it that for now, the claim here is that no, the covenant was made with Ishmael and his descendants, not with Isaac and his descendants. And this is what has caused so much, like I said, torment and war and violence between these two sides, because you have two sides that are essentially claiming to have a covenant with the God of the Bible or the God of the Quran, depending on which one you want to believe is the real true God. But they're both claiming to have a covenant here with the Father, and they're saying no, the covenant was made with Ishmael, no, the covenant was made with Isaac. So because of this, essentially these two sides have viewed themselves as enemies ever since then. And we just see this being repeated time and time and time again. And if you read Revelation, if you go back to our Revelation series, going back a couple months now, we kind of talked about how this whole thing is going to play out. And we do believe that it's going to be one final battle between the Arabs and the Jews for the most part. And it's very, very interesting here, because if you go back to Genesis, and as we saw out there, Genesis 17, it's God making an announcement that making his covenant with Isaac known to Abraham. But in the Quran, I guess that was also flipped, because the revelation was that the covenant was made with Ishmael, not Isaac. And like I said, it feels to me that every time God makes a covenant, makes the announcement, or chooses his people, Satan is already there to essentially invert and disturb everything that God has already done. It's the idea that Satan can't create, he can only essentially mimic what God does, right? And it's like I said, I'm trying to find the best way to say this because we are on YouTube here tonight, but it just feels like to me that every time we get to one of these types of situations, there's always somebody's hand involved here. And if you really get into the biblical context, you can tell exactly what's going on here. You exactly know whose hand is behind it if you're really paying attention here. But let's pause here for a second and give kind of a more clarity and context to the whole argument here in Genesis. Johnny, let me go ahead and ask you this question. We talked about kind of the relationship between Isaac and his brother Ishmael, and how this whole thing started from the very beginning and how it's progressing to this day. And it's funny how, like I said, even though the covenant was made with Isaac, God still made a promise to bless Ishmael, and it really had to do with his relationship with Abraham. But as a result of being blessed and a result of being fruitful, it wasn't until like years later that this whole thing escalated to a point where essentially these two sides were blood enemies to the point where they are now. So what's kind of your take on just the Genesis aspect of the relation of these two entities, going all the way back to Sarah, Abraham, and Hagar here?
What's my take on it? I mean, I could see how descendants of Ishmael may become a little jealous of the covenant that the descendants of Isaac have. So I think that's like one aspect of it, and another one is, it's with that jealousy in mind, it's pretty clear like how that would manifest given the curse that Sarah puts on Abraham and God declares over the descendants of Ishmael, like making them kind of like just a violent people. Not saying every single descendant of Ishmael is a violent person, just, just saying like on average, maybe. The Arab people, the Muslims, may be a little bit more violent. I think it's reasonable to say. So it makes sense that it all comes back to here. That's pretty much my take.
Yeah, like I said, you have to kind of go back to like understand here. Like I said, this has been a major sticking point with these two religions. It's like, who did God establish the covenant with? Was it Isaac? Was it Ishmael? If you go based on the Bible, it's saying Isaac. If you're going based off the Torah, which a lot of the Jewish people, even though the ones that reject Jesus Christ go off of, they all say it's Isaac as well. However, the Muslims and the Arabs believe that no, it was made with Ishmael based on the Quran. And because neither one of these sides are blaming here from, I guess the truth of the matter here, this is why you're having so much fighting going on right now. So this is kind of the fundamental aspect of why these two sides have been at war for so many years. And I said, I find it. I find it very, very odd here that, the more that we've been digging into Islam, and there's a lot of parallels to be had here, but the more you dig into Islam, it feels like that someone took everything that God loved and found a way to essentially use his own playbook against them to go to make war against everything that God loved. And we're talking about, the nation of Israel. We're talking about God's chosen people, the Jews. And look, there's a lot of Christians out there that believe nowadays that Israel and the Jews have no place in God's covenant anymore. I'll talk about that here in a second. But this is kind of just the historical aspect of this. Now you also have to look at the land aspect of this, because a lot of people are saying that, well, remove all of that context. This war going on between Israel and Palestine really just goes about who owns the land. And there's a lot of back and forth about, well, Palestine owned the land and then Israel took it from them. And then Israel wasn't an official country until like the 1950s. But obviously, if you look in the Bible, even in the Quran, even in all the other holy books here, that Israel was established far before the 1950s. So this whole idea that they didn't exist as a country before that is just completely like asinine. But people are running with that because essentially that's the narrative from the Hamas side here. So the question is is not exactly who is Israel, because the Bible makes it clear who Israel is. The question here should be, who was Palestine? And Johnny, do you have a little interesting a note here about kind of the origins of Palestine? Because a lot of people assume that Palestine is a nation that was originated with the Arabs, but that may not exactly be the case. Is that true?
It is not true. In fact, I before go too far away from the Ishmael Isaac thing,
Yeah.
if Palestine or the Arab people today truly had a right to the land, or were there first, or whatever, then we would expect to see Ishmael go into the land first. If we're going off base of the rule of precedence, but it's clear in the Bible that Ishmael goes off into the wilderness, which we now know is like Saudi Arabia, you know. Second off, to answer your question, yeah, Palestine, the Palestinian people, or Palestine, Israel turned into Palestine after the Romans conquered Israel. So they named Israel Syria Palestina because they wiped out the Jews and didn't want them coming back. And then that land, I mean, ultimately it was desolated, and then the Jews sort of started coming back. And once there was more attention on Israel in like the 1940s, because everyone was wanting oil and stuff like that, uh, once the Jews once the UN presented the Declaration of Independence, or the Declaration, for Israel in 1948, that's sort of when
Yeah.
the Arabs there started calling themselves Palestinians.
Yeah, and keep in mind, in 1948, the Palestinian state was not established either. So keep in mind, they're using that as the pretext to say that Israel stole the land from Palestine, but there's no record of Palestine in that remaining territory, especially in the West Bank during that time period as well.
Yeah, it was literally just the name for the region. It's not the name of a nation. That's like a really important thing. Like when we talk
Hmm.
about the Jews, that's a nation. That's the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are the Jews. We talk about Palestinians, that's just the people who live in the region. The Arabs are the nation, or some of the nation that lives there, and that's the descendants of Abraham, Ishmael, and so on.
Yeah. And I think there was like another proposal that I saw here. Let me see if I can bring this up. Hopefully it shows on your end so I can see it too. There we go. So here's a little bit more context. I'm trying to see if I can spread a little bit here. Yeah, it's not going to come out as clean as I was like it to, but I'm just going to read to it here. So it's showing here that area was British territory from the Ottomans, obviously, and like we talked about the Ottoman Empire. I think you mentioned the Roman Empire as well. I think we even double backed on this on the topic that we talked about the Jaw episode, where we're talking about what is this revived Roman Empire that's going to be around during the end times. So we talk about, if you look at the map, Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. There's a lot of those countries that are occupied by Arab nations today, and some of them are even occupied by a lot of European nations as well. But so you have, like I said, the Jews and Arabs lived there when the British conquered the land. Then you had the UN participation plan, which is a proposal accepted by the Jews and most of the world, but the Arabs rejected this plan and declared war, because essentially they did not want to share land or have a split land with the Jews at that time period. So the War of Independence, you go on, where Israel was attacked by 5 Arab states. There's a significance to that later on too. The Jews win the war. The state of Israel is born. Then there's another 6-day war, which is from Egypt trying to block Israel, essentially the Gaza Strip and many of the West Bank, but they kept that until there was a peace agreement agreed on with Egypt in '82. Then of course you go back to '93 with the Oslo Accords, and the first time Palestinians ruled any of the land. And then of course Israel fully withdraws from Gaza in 2005. And like I said, the whole concept of the Gaza has been very, very strong here in the last few decades. decades here. But so this is kind of a quick progression of how we end up here as far as the land goes. Like I said, there's a lot more here that we can dig deeper into. We just don't have the time constraints to do it right now, but we will come back to this. I do want to answer this question. This is actually a very important question I want to hit up with you, Johnny. This comes from Duke Nukem. He asks, how can the Jews be God's chosen people if they rejected him? Now, keep in mind, this is actually a very good question because there's a lot of Christians who believe this as well. These people who profess to be Christians who see this the same way. Because from the Christian perspective, which is what we're talking about here tonight, they believe that in the New Testament that the church actually replaced Israel. So the church has essentially taken over the promises that were given to Israel. Some people have, I guess, twisted this to say that, oh, well, the Israel has always been the church of Christ or the church of God, essentially what they're saying here. And as a result of that, they say that the church has replaced Israel, that God's chosen people are Christians, not the Jews, that God no longer has any covenant or promises to the nation of Israel, to the Jewish people. And as a result of this, they fundamentally reject the idea of the Zionism, the Jewish state, and a lot of the Jewish people in general, because they don't believe that the Jews of today have any of the rights or authorities to any of these promises that state here. Now, as we just read with Genesis 17 here, when God was talking with Abraham, he makes it very clear that he's going to make an everlasting covenant with Isaac, which is obviously the father of the 7 tribes of Israel here. So we're talking about an ethnic state of Israel. You can't sit here and say that the church replaced that covenant when God himself said that there was an everlasting covenant in the Old Testament. This is why I always go back to the Christians that make this argument, who think this, are saying that no, there's clearly a numerous old covenant ties to the nation of Israel and to the Jews that still apply to this day. Now, people like Duke Nukem and a lot of other Christians will ask, well, how can the Jews still be God's chosen people if they rejected Christ, right? Well, if you've noticed throughout the course of the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Jews are a very hard-headed, stick-necked people, right? They've always not listened to God despite the fact that they're his chosen people. When he brought them out of Egypt, what was the first thing they do? They started worshiping a golden calf, right? So they've rejected the Father on multiple occasions, even though he's the one who brought them out of the land to begin with. That you saw in the New Testament, when he went to preach, Jesus Christ came to earth to preach the gospel to the Jews. They rejected his message because they were looking for essentially a war leader. They were looking for someone who was going to help the Jews rule over the Gentiles, because they thought that the Gentiles were the ones that were oppressing them. So they thought that their Messiah was going to be a person who's going to rule over the Gentiles and make the Jews rule on him here on earth. So because Jesus didn't do that in his first coming, they rejected him as Christ. And as a result of rejecting their Messiah, they rejected the Holy Spirit as well. So the Jews, I mean, if you look at the Old Testament to the New Testament, the Jews have, in a lot of cases, rejected the Trinity by and large as a people. Now, with that said, there are still Jews who follow God. There are still Jews that follow Jesus Christ. It's important to note that 11 of the 12 apostles were Jewish, right? So what you're saying here is that even though by and large, if you look at the Jewish people today, they reject God, they reject Jesus Christ, that does not mean that they don't still have a promises that are laid to them. And I think the big dissension point with a lot of people is that even though it's not all the Jews who are following Christ, there's still going to be some Jews, and we talked about this at the very beginning of the show, the 144,000 who will be selected in the 7-year tribulation to preach the gospel with Jesus Christ in Israel during that time period, which means that God still views the Jews as his chosen people, and he's already has his selected elect of Jews who will play a very pivotal role in those end times. So yes, they're not listing right now at this very moment, but there are up to what I think 200 to 400,000 Messianic Jews in the world today. And I'm pretty sure that the Messianic Jews, some of those are going to be the ones elected in the end times. Depending on how close we are to those end times, we can debate later. But to answer your question, even though by and large the people have still rejected him, doesn't mean that the Jews aren't his special people, because you can say the same thing about the Gentiles. Sure, there's a lot of Gentiles who believe in Jesus Christ, but guess what? There's a lot of Gentiles who have rejected Jesus Christ as well. So you can't say that, well, they're not en masse in support of Christ, so they can't be his people, because you can make the exact same argument about us. I think that's the context that a lot of people miss there. But let me ask you this question just before we move on to our next topic here. What is kind of your take on this idea that the church replaced Israel? Because I think that this is something we'll talk about here in the future next few weeks, this argument. But this is a big reason why there's so many people, especially online, who don't believe in pre-tribulation rapture, because they believe that the church replaced Israel. But Israel is part of the 7-year tribulation. So if you believe that the church replaced Israel, then you can't believe the church will be raptured before the tribulation starts. What's kind of your take on this whole thing from a Christian perspective?
Well, that ideology, replacement theology,
Yeah.
is it just makes everything like not make sense. There is some scripture in Romans, I believe, that say like the fullness of the Gentiles will come in, and then God's focus will be on Israel again. And
Yeah.
then I think, I don't even know if you need that scripture to realize that God made an everlasting covenant with the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's reiterated over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, we are grafted in to that olive tree. I believe that's in Romans 11. But then
Yeah.
Paul goes on to say that, like, the promises still hold for
Yeah.
the Jews, you know?
Yeah,
So,
just real quick, because I've heard a lot of people try to use Romans 9 as like a proof text that the church replaced Israel, but Romans 9 is talking about the nation of Israel, not, the church, aka being represented in Israel. Then if you read further into Romans 11, Paul makes it even more clear that he's talking about his people, the Jewish people. He's talking about his nation, Israel, the physical nation of Israel. So this idea that no, it's the church that's replaced them, it's not even what he's saying in Romans 9, Romans 11, and that's what a lot of people are using to make this argument here.
it just doesn't really make that much sense. And if God didn't fulfill his promises to the Jewish people, um that would make him a promise breaker. You know what I mean? And that's not who God is. In fact, like, Ezekiel 36 kind of paints a great picture of this. It basically says that, yeah, while the Jews were in the land, they defiled it, they worshipped idols, they turned from the Lord, and so God spread them out among the nations.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes on to say in Ezekiel 36:22, thus says the Lord God, I do not do this for your sake, O house of Israel, but for my holy name's sake, which you have profaned among the nations wherever you went. Like, God keeps his promises. He's going to regather Israel. Well, he already has, but he's going to sprinkle clean water on them and give them a new heart, is what this goes on to say, because God made a promise to the Jewish people, to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He chose them to just give us an example of how, no matter what we do, when God makes an unconditional, everlasting covenant, he's going to keep the covenant.
Yeah, so let me answer Kate's point here, because she was talking about this, and we did bring this up weeks ago about the Talmud and what the Talmud preaches, and like I said, it's this question about, okay, well, how many Jews who reject Jesus Christ follow the Talmud? Because what we've been told is that no, the Jews just rejected the New Testament, but they still follow the Old Testament. However, the Talmud has a lot of teachings that are very, very anti-Gentile and has a lot of, let's just say, evil things promoted there against the Gentiles. So you have to ask yourself this question, well, which Jews are, especially when you're looking at the nation of Israel currently, which Jews are following the teachings of this book rather than the teachings of Jesus Christ? And I did kind of mention this earlier today. at the end of the day, you're looking at both Israel and Hamas. You're looking at two sides that have rejected Jesus Christ and rejected his teachings in the Bible and the New Testament. And as a result of this, they both look at each other as blood enemies who need to be wiped out and eradicated because neither side has any compassion for one another. And this is essentially the consequences of rejecting Jesus Christ. And you're seeing this right now. Now, this is where I think a lot of Christians, or even, not a lot of Christians, but some Christians out there go a little too far with their hatred of Israel and their hatred of the Jews, because obviously we can understand that, yeah, there are Jewish people out there who, let's be very, very clear here, they are working for evil. I mean, there's no way you can justify the teachings of the Talmud against, the Gentiles and assume that somehow you're in any way, shape, or form following the Old Testament God. You're not doing that at all. But because you have all of these groups that are kind of blended in with one another. Like I said, you have the people who are following the Talmud blended in with the people who just want a nation for Israel versus the people who are actually following, Jesus Christ, excuse me, in the Jewish community. It's hard to differentiate between these groups. And so what happens is that they all get lumped into one, and they go, well, because I don't like these group of Jewish people here, then I completely against all of Israel, and I'm completely against everything that the Jewish people claims that they're the true people of God, when they're not, because they don't. I hate to say this as a dispensationalist, Mark, 'cause I know some people don't like hearing that word, but this is what happens when you don't properly put into context the groups here that we're talking about. Because we mentioned Revelation 2:9 and 3:9. Jesus is very, very well aware of the fact that there are people out there claiming to be Jews, claiming to be God's chosen people, who really are not, who are the synagogue of Satan, because they claim that title of Jew, but they don't follow anything that God has actually said, whether it's the Old Testament version of God or the New Testament, right? They're just claiming that, well, I'm ethnically Jewish, and even though they're secular Jews, they don't follow anything, or they have very, very let's just say very, very satanic followings within some of their books and their followings here. And look, Jesus is well aware of these people, but with that said, there are still going to be Jews on the side of Jesus Christ, because at the end of the day, when you look at the 7-year tribulation, that final 7 years, it really comes down to a redemption of the nation of Israel and a redemption of Jerusalem. Like I said, everything that's going on right now, God is known for a very, very long time. He knows that the people in Jerusalem are not adhering to his word. He knows there's a lot of people who are against him right now. That doesn't change the fact that he's still going to redeem him in those end times. So I think it's an important distinction to make there about the Jews who follow the Talmud or the Torah, or the ones who are actually following Christ. The awesome one has a little verse here from Psalm 74:2. Says, "Remember the nation you purchased long ago, the people of your inheritance, who you are redeemed, Mount Zion, where you dwell." Yeah, we'll talk about this one here too. So I want to play a little bit of this video here from Todd Friel from Wretched. If you guys don't know Wretched, he has a very popular channel on YouTube. But I want to play a couple of minutes of this because it's going to kind of recap a lot of the things that we talked about here, and it's also going to give a little bit more insight on kind of this whole conflict here with Israel and Hamas.
Israel and Hamas, not the only two people groups at war. This is Wretched Radio. As we watch missiles being lobbed, we would do well to recognize exactly what that skirmish is, because whilst it is a land war, Paul told the Ephesians it's a spiritual battle, and so it is. What we are seeing in the Middle East, yep, it's a land war, but it is most certainly contrary to what President George W. Bush said. It is a religious war. You'll recall after September 11th, our president, who apparently didn't take the time to read a history book on the religion of Islam, proclaimed it's a religion of peace. Historically, it is most certainly not. It is a bellicose religion, and they have been waging war against everybody in their region for centuries. When did this skirmish begin? Let me suggest to you, it goes back to Abraham's time. Do you recall the story of Abraham and Sarah? Supposed to have a baby together. Sarah got a little impatient, gave Abraham her maidservant Hagar. He gets pregnant with the bondservant, and they bear a son whose name is Ishmael. And in Genesis chapter 16, the angel of the Lord appears to Hagar. "Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son, And you'll call his name Ishmael. The Lord has heard your affliction. He, Ishmael, shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. You say, what does that have to do with Islam and Judaism and Christianity? Well, if you would ask a good Muslim, they would tell you that the heir of promise is not Isaac, it is Ishmael. The descendants of Ishmael are the Arabic people. Please note, not every Arab is a Muslim. The majority are, and the Muslims who are Arabic would point to Ishmael as their great-great-great-great-grandfather, not Isaac. And so in the Middle East, you see a people group, the Jews, who would say, oh no, the son of the promise, it's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. Not so in Islam. They would say that it's Abraham, Ishmael, the Arabic people, and the religion of Islam. And this description by the angel of the Lord in Genesis 16 has been playing itself out now for centuries. Furthermore,
So just a quick little stop right there. Like I say, it's pretty much recapped what we talked about here in the first 30 minutes here of the show about how we essentially got to this point. So I was going to give a little bit more context of kind of the conflict that we're actually watching right now.
Islam is determined to wipe out Israel. Since 1948, they have been making an intense effort to get Jewish people out of a territory they believe is theirs, which of course was originally the Jewish people's, but we seem to forget that part of history. Nevertheless, this is yet another assault by Islam, the sons of Ishmael, against the sons of Isaac. In other words, it's a religious war. Furthermore, don't forget, it is Islam's intention to subjugate the entire world underneath the Prophet Muhammad, to bring in their understanding of eschatological events. It is a religious war. And I would suggest to you, we're having one of those right here in the good old US of A. And you say, wait a second, nobody's
I do want to pause just real quick on what he just said there, because some of that might have went over some people's heads. Let me just rewind here for a second. I've heard this said by a number of Muslim people, by the way, as well. So we all talk about kind of like the conflict between like Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims and how that's been going on within the Muslim community. There are a group of Muslims out there who are trying to essentially evoke war against the Christians and against the Jews for the sole purpose that they believe that by doing this, this will essentially bring the Mahdi into the world faster, and that's essentially that their end game here. They want to bring the Mahdi into the world so that he can essentially rule over the Islamic world, help them take over the world and eradicate the Christians and the Jews. Right now, we've talked about in episode 5 here, going back to those two figures. I strongly believe that those two figures, the Mahdi and the Muslim Jesus, are in fact the Antichrist and the false prophet that are warned against in the Bible. And keep in mind, like we said earlier, that book in Revelation was written over 500 years before Muhammad's first revelation about anything about how the Islam thinks that this whole thing is going to end. So essentially what happened is that I believe a demonic figure perverted the book of Revelations to convince the Arab people that they were on the right side of God when they actually weren't, right? But this is what he's talking about here. The reason why you see so much violence out there, because there is a portion of the Arab community that thinks that by doing what they're doing now, that the Mahdi will come in faster and help them take over. So like I say, you're seeing the pieces here of what's being foretold here in Revelation. Did you know about that little tidbit there, Johnny?
Which tidbit are you referring to specifically?
Oh, about the like I said, the Muslims who are trying to bring forth the Mahdi by going to war.
I know the Mahdi is going to be some sort of political, military, religious leader. I did not exactly know that Islamic military action speeds up the entrance of the Mahdi. I guess similar to how Gentiles spreading the gospel kind of speeds up the return of Jesus in a sense.
Mm-hmm. He says, sounds like some Christian Zionists. It's like, oh, it's actually funny because I was actually going to respond to what Joseph said in our Rumble chat. Now, Joseph said, and this is like I said, we're going to have to cover this in a future episode here, this whole thing about the elect. But Joseph says in our Rumble chat, you must believe in Jesus to be elect or chosen. If you don't believe in Jesus, you don't go to heaven. Judas was chosen before the cross. I still support Israel over Hamas, but you are no longer chosen. So, like I said, there's this. Look, I have to call this out for what it is. This is a big thing with Calvinism, and Calvinism won't be the topic of tonight's show. We'll talk about it in future episodes, but Calvinism is one of the big subsects of Christianity, driving the idea behind the church replacing Israel, about the whole idea that Jesus didn't die for all, he only died for the elect, that you have to be an elect in order to be saved by Christ. And I think there's a massive misconstruing of the scriptures here to make a lot of these assumptions, but we have to talk about that on another date because we have to focus on what we're doing here tonight there. But we will discuss some of these issues in more detail in future episodes. But let me finish this one part here, then we can go on to our next topic.
Nobody's bombing America. You're right. Not at the moment. But I would still make the case that we are experiencing the same type of war here in the States as they are in the Middle East, because it too is a spiritual war. It is a battle that is taking place between religions. And you say, who are we talking about here? Evangelicals and some sort of, like the Hindus? No. I would suggest to you, we are seeing a religious war between Christianity and everything else, whether it's secularism, whether it is a religious system. But for the sake of simplification and an understanding of history, are we seeing a war between Christianity and paganism? You say paganism? Well, that doesn't seem to be that overt. Well, hold on, let's do a little history lesson and go back in time and recognize that Western civilization prior to the ascendancy of Christianity was pagan. The gods. Now, by the way, please note, all earthly sort of gods, these are earthbound characters for the most part. They were not transcendent deities. They were earthly. Nevertheless, they were worshipped for centuries, and it was Christianity that ultimately pervaded the darkness, brought in the light, and pushed paganism, for the most part, out. Not totally, but for the most part. And what we are seeing...
So let's pause it right there for a second, because when we talk about this with our conversation on the Roman Catholic Church and about how a lot of paganism has essentially crept into the Roman Catholic Church, you can argue it's pretty much taken over that church here now. But I think he makes a great point, is that when it really comes down to it, you're seeing a war between Christianity and paganism. And you think to yourself, well, how does that apply to, the Jews and the Arabs, right? Because they're neither Christians or pagans. Well, the truth is that if you look at both of these sides here, even though they're on opposing sides and they consider themselves enemies, there are elements to paganism that have snuck into both the religion of Islam and the Judaism as well. And like I said, when you're talking about two sides that are rejecting Jesus Christ, usually whatever side in world history has rejected Christ and rejected God, they have adopted some form of paganism one way or another. And look, you can't be a pagan and be a Christian at the same time. It's the whole adage of you can't serve two masters, because you're going to hate the one and go against the other. This is the same thing that we're seeing here. There's a lot of people that think that they can have it both ways. It's like, no, whenever you separate yourself from the God of the Bible, it's only going to lead to one way or another. It may not be as let's just say as clear as what's the best way to do it? It may not be as in your face as some of the other religions that we see, or just outright paganism, but it's always going to be there in a very, very subtle sense. So we've talked about kind of the history of these two sides, why they're always fighting, what the dispute is. So what I want to end this last section of this episode on is that a lot of people are seeing what's going on with Israel. A lot of people are seeing what's going on with Hamas. There's a lot of violence on the Gaza Strip right now. There's talks about airstrikes, bombing, terrorist attack, all of this stuff. And the question that a lot of Christians have had is that, are we essentially looking at the war that's going to bring forth the 7-year tribulation? Are we looking at the war that's going to jumpstart the end? And we'll go, there's a few lines here in scripture that we can talk about here for a second. And I want to kind of start off with kind of the Old Testament descriptions of how this whole thing plays out. I think it gives a little bit more a credence to what we're seeing here. And I do want to like warn people here too, because I know there's a lot of people that are kind of panicking, they're kind of uneasy about what's going on, because I think the reality of, well, actually we may be closer to the end than maybe I realize, has some people panicked. But you shouldn't be panicked, because what's happening in Israel right now, what's happening in the Gaza, what's happening in all these countries has already been foretold, and it's been foretold many, many times. Let's look at some of the Old Testament prophecies regarding this conflict, and these are things that are happening right now, and these are things that are also going to be happening in the future as well. So let's start off with Zechariah. I want to start here with Zechariah 14. This is 1 through 5. This is talking about the day of the Lord. Now, like I said, this is something that's more like in the future, but you're starting to see the pieces being put together now. It says here, behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst. For I shall gather the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. Half the city shall go into captivity, but the remnants of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth, and he will fight against those nations as he fought in the day of the battle. And on that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which face Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall split into two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half the mountain shall move towards the north, and half of it towards the south. And then you shall flee through the mountain valley, for the mountain valley shall reach to Estel. And it says, yes, you shall flee. And as you fled from the earthquake in the days of what's his name? Uzziah. Uzziah. I think we say Uzziah, king of Judah. Thus the Lord my God will come, and all the saints with you. So if you're looking at this one, this is from Zechariah, by the way. If you're looking at the context here, this is really foretelling the final battle here. I know a lot of people are saying that this is about a battle that's already happened, but there's a lot of keys and a lot of references here to a battle that has not yet happened, but a battle that will happen. And kind of the idea from this passage is that a lot of the things that you're seeing, even Jesus Christ himself warned that these are things that have to happen before the end times. Let me jump over here to another Old Testament prophecy here. This is Ezekiel. This is chapter 7, 23 through 27. And I'll make a quick read here. It says, make a chain, for the land is filled with crimes of blood, and the city is full of violence. Therefore, I will bring the worst of the Gentiles, and they shall possess their houses. I shall cause the rump to be strong to cease, and their holy places shall be defiled. Destruction comes. They will seek peace, and there shall be none. Disaster will bring upon disaster, and rumor will be upon rumor. And they shall seek a vision from a prophet, but the law will perish from the priest, and the counsel from the elders. The king will mourn, the prince will be clothed with the desolation, and the hands of the common people will tremble. And I will do to them according to their way, and according to what they'll deserve. I shall judge them, and they shall know that I am the Lord. So that's a prophecy there from Ezekiel, which is once again prophesying a lot of the end times, especially with Israel. Because keep in mind, all of these verses that I'm bringing here are in the context of Israel. And I have one more Old Testament prophecy here. This is from Isaiah. This is from chapter 1. This would be 21 to 31. And then we'll stop here for a second. It says, keep in mind, it says the degenerate city. So how faithful has the city become a harlot? It was full of justice, righteousness lodged on it, but now it's murderous. Your silver has become dross, your wine mixed with water. Your princes are rebellious, your companions of thieves. And everyone loves the bribes, and everyone follows after rewards. They do not defend the fatherless, nor does the cause of the widow come before them. Therefore, the Lord says, the Lord of your host, the mighty one of Israel, I will rid myself of my adversaries. I will take vengeance upon my enemies, and I will turn my hand against you, and thus thoroughly purge away your dross and take away all your alloy. I will restore your judges as at its first, and your counselors at the beginning. Afterwards, you shall be called the city of righteousness, a faithful city. Zion shall be redeemed with justice. Zion being Israel, Jerusalem, more specifically, but yeah, Israel. And there should in her parents with her righteousness, the destruction of transgressors and of sinners shall be together. And for those who forsake the Lord shall be consumed. They shall be ashamed of their tenebrous trees, which you have desired, and you shall be embarrassed because of the gardens which for you have chosen. For you shall be as tenebrous as those leaves fade, and as the gardens that have no water. The strong shall be as tinder, the spark. So the work shall be of the spark. Both will burn together. No one shall quench them. So those are, keep in mind, those are all Old Testament prophecies, and essentially how the redemption of Israel and how the fall of Israel will occur, especially in those end times. So before I jump over to a kind of our ending point here, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on kind of reflecting on some of those Old Testament prophecies on Israel and Jerusalem, and see if you had anything that you want to add on that one, Johnny.
I definitely want to add on some more Zechariah. So just before Zechariah 14, in Zechariah 14, God's clearly talking about the day of the Lord, the tribulation, when Jesus comes back, feet on the Mount of Olives, and comes to destroy the armies in the flesh, like Jesus comes back. But just before that, in Zechariah 12, he goes
By
on
the
to
way, if
say,
you have this, you can always screen share it so I can show it to like the rest of the people too. I'm not sure if you know how to do that,
oh, that's
but
a good idea.
yeah, if you do present and then it gives you a screen share option, that way we can read along with you as well.
Let's see. Can you see that?
Yeah, and I can actually pull it up right now.
So, let's zoom in a little bit. The burden of the word of the Lord against Israel. Thus says the Lord, who stretches out the heavens, lays the foundations of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples who would heave it away. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, though all the nations of the earth are gathered against it. Just like these two verses right here, Jerusalem becoming a cup of drunkenness and being a heavy stone to every nation. You look at the response of the world. Like, look at the response of the world of Ukraine versus Russia to Israel versus Hamas or the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Right? It's like all of America immediately got riled up and was either gung-ho for pro-Palestine or pro-Israel. And that's the same with like the rest of especially the Western world, but like Arab countries are included in this, especially with large Muslim populations. And compare that to Russia and Ukraine. Like, everyone in America was just like, why are we over there? Let's get out. I mean, a few people were like pro Ukraine, whatever. Just that, propaganda or whatever. But there was no, the response to war in Jerusalem and the anti-Zionist, the anti-Jew or anti-Semite response in the majority of places makes it seem like Jerusalem is a very heavy stone right now. And I want to just point out there that it shall be in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. God is promising that if we're against Jerusalem, we're going to get destroyed. So just a fair warning there, if you're going out and protesting or something like that.
Yeah, this is like another thing that this is something we'll talk about right before we end this whole thing, and it's the side from Christians who are like, we shouldn't side with Israel at all. They're not our enemy. They're not our allies. They're our enemies. And they've gone so far off the reservation that they hate Israel, they hate the Jews, and they just view like the whole thing like they're their enemies. And I'm thinking to myself, have you guys read like a lot of the Bible, especially Revelation? Because this whole idea that you can be an enemy of Israel in the last days is not going to end well for you right now. But I think what you're seeing here is just how strong the spirit of the Antichrist is growing right now. And I think for a lot of Christians like us, we're seeing it growing, and a lot of people don't know what's about to happen and don't know what's about to go down. And yeah, I also want to put it like perfectly, it's essentially a test run what we're seeing here in these last days. So let me kind of wrap things up by talking about this. I want to talk about Jesus's warning of the end times. This is in Matthew 24 here, and this is going to roll back to pretty much everything that we've been talking about over the last few weeks here. But this is Jesus's warning about how the end times is going to go, and he says here that this is Matthew 24 3 through 14, just in case you want to follow along. It says here that now he sat on the Mount of Olives, which we're bringing that name up again, so you should have been paying attention. The disciples came to him privately and says, "Tell us, when will we see these things, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" Jesus answered to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear about wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all of these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom will rise against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. These are the beginning of the sorrows. And they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And you will, there will be many who will be offended and will betray one another and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will be abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures till the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached all in the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. So Christ is giving us essentially a playbook of how this whole thing is going to end. And like I said, they're talking about so many things that we'll have to talk about in future episodes. This whole idea of Christian nationalism, that we're just going to take over like a nation and make it Christian, and we're going to make it like a godlike, like guys, I hate to break this to you, whoever buying into this Christian nationalism narrative, you're buying into a pipe dream, because this is not how God said this is going to end at all. And it says that in the final days, we're going to be seeing a lot of the things that we're seeing right now, and that's only going to be a sign that things are about to end here. But there's a couple things that really struck out to me, and I read this back like months ago, and when you really start understanding Islam and kind of the whole eschatology behind that versus what Jesus is saying here, keep in mind, he's warning you of what's going to happen in the tribulation. And the first thing he tells you is that take heed no one deceives you, because many will come in my name saying I am Christ. And if you load the Islamic religion, they believe that Jesus, quote unquote Jesus, or Isa, however you want to pronounce it, is going to come back in the last days, but they believe that he's going to be a Muslim, and he is going to confirm that the Christians and the Jews were wrong about who Jesus Christ was. He's going to deny that he was the Son of God. He's going to deny that he was crucified. He's going to claim to be the Son of Mary, and he's going to give power to the Mahdi so that people will follow the Mahdi. That's what Muslims in the religion of Islam believe about Jesus Christ. So what do we know about the Bible? Well, we know about the Bible that there's going to be a beast that comes out of the sea and a beast that comes out of the earth. This is going to be your Antichrist and your false prophet. And then these two are going to lead the armies of Satan against Israel in the final days here. And it's very interesting when you look at the description of the false prophet. It says that this is a figure that's going to essentially have two horns like a lamb. He's going to appear like a lamb, but he's going to speak like a dragon. So if you don't understand what that means that this individual is going to look like Jesus Christ. He's going to pretend to be like Jesus Christ, but he's going to speak like a dragon, which means that he's going to be empowered by Satan. So you have this warning that was given in 90 AD. about how the end times is going to play out, and then several hundred years later, centuries later, you had this prophecy saying that no, actually there's going to be another Jesus Christ that comes. He's going to prove that all the Christians and Jews are wrong. Here's Jesus in Matthew, the book of Matthew, saying that there's going to be literally a false Christ and a false prophets who are going to come to deceive the world. And he's telling you, do not be deceived, because he's giving you this warning now, and he's going to assume that if you're a true follower, that you're going to heed this warning and not be fooled when those end times actually happen. So knowing this, and if you look at the pieces that are being at play here, it's no surprise that the enemies of Israel, the ones that we've talked about throughout the course of the night, Old Testament and New Testament, it says that Israel is going to be surrounded, that people are going to have to flee parts of Israel, that the Antichrist is going to take over Jerusalem. He's going to build a desolation of abomination. He's going to do all of these things. And it's really no secret and no surprise that all the enemies of Israel right now are Arab majority nations. They're all Arab majority nations. You're seeing the conflict now with Hamas. You have so many broken relations with countries like Egypt and Iran and Afghanistan and Iraq, breakdowns with Saudi Arabia. Israel is quite literally right now surrounded by its enemies, and we're seeing that even though we're not in the final 7 years right now, the stage is clearly being set for the final 7 years. And you think to yourself, well, what does it mean to essentially the spirit of the Antichrist? We don't know exactly who the Antichrist is yet. I don't think anyone knows. But what does it mean to live in the spirit of Antichrist? What it means is that this figure, when he does arrive, is going to be a very, very popular figure. He's going to be loved by so many people around the world. Why is that the case? Why would a demonic figure be loved by the world? Well, it's for two reasons. One, because if this figure is in fact the Mahdi that the Muslims believe is going to be here, it's going to be in their eyes a fulfillment of their prophecy, because when this individual arrives along with the Muslim Jesus, it's going to look like to the Muslims that, hey, our prophecy has come true. We're the true religion, and that you guys need to follow us, or if you don't follow us, you're an enemy of us, and then you need to die, right? That's essentially how it's going to be presented on one side. On the other side, you're going to have a bunch of unbelievers who have never seen anything. You've all heard the excuse, I can't believe in God because I haven't seen any miracles. I haven't seen any evidence that he exists. Well, guess what? This individual is going to perform miracles that are going to be, that are not going to be, are pretty much not going to be believed by the majority of people of the world. And they're going to think to themselves, oh, he's doing these great wonders. He has to be the person that we all believe to be the true Jesus Christ. We're going to follow him, and we're going to follow the figure he's telling us to figure. So a lot of people are going to be deceived based on that as well. Another reason why, it's because if you look at what's going on right now, there is a growing hatred of Israel. And whether you like the people who are running Israel now, we all know that Israel is going to be the focus point that God defends in the final days. But there's a lot of people out there that think that Israel is the enemy that needs to be destroyed. Here's the founder of Black Lives Matter a few years ago talking about her fight against the nation of Israel and why we need to essentially support Palestine and basically tear down the state of Israel.
The other thing I'll say is Palestine is our generation South Africa. And if we don't step up boldly and courageously to end the imperialist project that's called Israel, we're doomed. And I think that I had learned about Palestine for a long time. I had known about it, been wanting to travel, and I was really, really grateful when the Dream Defenders asked me to come on the delegation. But nothing would have prepared me for the level of militarization and the level of violence that we would witness those 10 days inside of Palestine. Nothing would have prepared me for the ways in which we witness people's terror. People live in terror on a daily basis. And nothing would have prepared me for how much clarity I would have on why we have to be a part of Palestinian solidarity.
So that's the leader of Black Lives Matter. And keep in mind, a lot of people who support Black Lives Matter holds the same position that she does. So like I said, it's not a coincidence that the enemies of the Christian religion are all finding ways to side with Hamas or with Palestine over Israel, or have some kind of deep-seated hatred of Israel right now. It's like, yeah, exactly. You don't want to go to Palestine at the moment here, but Johnny, let me ask you this question here. When you look at kind of the atmosphere and kind of the narrative that's being brought about right now, do you feel like we're essentially setting the stage for the Antichrist to make his arrival and be the figure that leads the world? Because there are so many people, including some people who claim to be Christians, like some people in our Rumble chat, who, like I said, view Israel with nothing but hatred and contempt. And if they see a figure come to prominence who is going to promise the world that he's going to lead a war against Israel in its current state, that they're going to side with him.
Yeah, it's this conflict in Israel is definitely setting the stage for like something big to happen. All I can say is, like, I don't exactly know how it's going to go down. There's a lot of rumors of, literally just rumors of wars, that this conflict could, destroy Hamas, destroy Hezbollah, like destroy all the enemies around Israel's borders. Um, which I believe would be a fulfillment of the Psalm 83 war. Go look that up on your own time. It could fulfill the Isaiah 17:1 prophecy, the destruction of Damascus forever. And it, like, just the amount of uncertainty in the region and the motivation for the enemies moving in, defending the Al-Aqsa Mosque against the Judaizing of the Temple Mount, against a rebuilt third temple. That reminds me of another part of Matthew 24. Jesus talking about the abomination of desolation. And that's also described in Second Thessalonians, where Paul is essentially saying the Antichrist is going to come on the scene, and he's going to exalt himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. That's a big, maybe I'll call it black flag of the Mahdi right there. Two, how does someone sit themselves in the temple of God without a temple? They can't. There needs to be a rebuilt Jewish temple. And the uncertainty around this conflict, and the motivation for this war, and then, the talk of, the red heifers and like the Temple Institute, like preparing everything for the third temple, we really could see the rebuilding of a third temple in the very, very near future. Depending on however this plays out, maybe Jerusalem gets completely ransacked and the Mahdi or Antichrist comes and says, y'all lost really bad, so we'll let you build the temple. Or maybe Israel will come out on top, destroying all their enemies in the region, and the Iranians will basically be in a frenzy and be like, hey, they'll try like some sort of diplomatic approach, and the Antichrist will make a treaty then that allows them to build the temple. I don't exactly know how it's going to go. Maybe a temple isn't even going to be rebuilt in the near future, but the uncertainty in the region certainly opens up a lot of possibilities. And many of those possibilities could lead us right into that 7-year tribulation.
I thought about this too, but it didn't really hit me until today. But you know that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, that there's a lot of people who don't like this guy, and they don't like him for a multitude of reasons. And it's funny, even like, let's just say Hollywood, for an example. We know Hollywood is absolutely no friend to Christ or anything Christian or godly whatsoever. But even the Jews in Hollywood who pretend like they support Israel, they all hate Benjamin Netanyahu, which I find very, very interesting. And it seems like he's the figurehead, or one of the top figureheads that they want to get rid of. Obviously, I think you could say they want to get rid of Putin a little bit more than him too. But when we talk about the whole war of Gog and Magog, maybe that's why they're trying to get so hard to get rid of Putin. So maybe that's another future prophecy to keep an eye on. But I'm thinking to myself here, like, as we know in Revelation, that the Antichrist is going to have to present a peace covenant with the people of Israel, at least for the first 3.5 years, so they can build that temple that he's essentially going to take over, right? And I'm thinking to myself, if we're watching essentially what could be the final stages of the end times here, what if getting rid of the current prime minister of Israel is a step towards that revelation? Because obviously they don't like him, because, well, if he's still going to war against, these Arab nations that they don't agree with here, what if their plan is essentially replace him with someone who would in fact sign a peace treaty with the Arab nations around them that could bring forth the Antichrist in the end times too? So people don't really look at it from that perspective, but I'm looking like, well, if everyone who's seemingly against God is also against Benjamin Netanyahu, we know how important of a role Israel plays in this whole thing playing out. What if getting rid of him is also another step of this whole thing ending the way that we think that it's going to end as well?
Yeah, it could be. I tell you what, the enemies of Israel, I feel like, were a lot closer to getting Netanyahu out of office before the war started, because of all those political dealings, all the judicial reforms he was trying to push through.
Yeah.
Ever since the war was declared, which is, the first war in exactly 50 years that's been declared in Israel, the government has actually united quite significantly. That could quickly turn as the world turns against Israel and is like, oh, why are you invading Hamas, even though they killed more Jews in a single day than since the Holocaust? Why are you invading Gaza? I don't know. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty, but that certainly could be a part of the plan.
Yeah. And like I said, all it takes is like one bombing that happened in Gaza and everyone to start playing the videos and the pictures from the region. And then all of a sudden it takes one world cry of, we need to get rid of this person right now. I mean, we saw it happen with Putin just a couple of years ago. They went to war with Ukraine, and all of a sudden the entire world wanted to get rid of Putin. It's like, he has to die. He has to be removed. So all it takes is one little instant, and all of a sudden the world is redirected at him as well. So I think those are a couple of countries that I would definitely keep an eye on right now. Those are a couple of figures that I would keep an eye on right now too, because if Putin was to somehow be removed out of Russia, and if Netanyahu would somehow be removed out of Israel, like I said, I think we're knocking on the door like right now, because it's going to be very easy for them to install someone who can fulfill the prophecies that we hear that we're talking about, and then all of a sudden we're off to the races here. But one last thing that I want to do before we wrap up here tonight is that there's this talk about, like I said, we look at the Antichrist and his rule over the world, and we think to ourselves, how can the world allow this? How can the world allow an agent of Satan to essentially control the entire world? And people are actually going to love this figure, and they're gonna worship him, and they're gonna view him as a great leader and all this stuff. Like, how could we get to that point? Like, some people don't believe that we can get to that point. People feel like, oh, it'll never get that bad. Well, if what we're seeing right now is the prelude to a war in Jerusalem, which is going to be quite literally the armies of Satan versus the armies of God in that time frame, there's a lot of people in the world right now who are siding with the armies of Palestine, aka they're siding against Israel and kind of wish war against Israel. And there's been a number of videos to support this over the course of the last few weeks here. I have a few which I'm going to play to you. And look, I know we can look at countries like, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and a lot of the Muslim majority countries, but it's not just the Muslim majority countries that are happening too. Here's a video here out of Sweden. A lot of people there in Stockholm in Sweden. Here's another example. This is New York City. Shouldn't be surprising to anyone, but here's what New York looks like.
to see how everyone will just fall rank and file to the Antichrist if he turns out to be Palestinian or Muslim.
Yep, and it gets worse. Here's Washington D.C. Here's another city.
And the occupation now! Stop the genocide! Stop the genocide! Stop the genocide! Stop the genocide! Stop the genocide!
By the way, with the way that these protests have consumed, you would think they were the ones who got attacked first, right?
Biden, you can't hide!
Hey, what about the Uyghur genocide in China that are literally maiming millions of people?
Well, we don't need to talk about that one. We don't talk about that one. Here's Sweden again. Like I said, this is in multiple countries all over the world. This isn't just like one isolated incident. That's Sweden. Here's another one in London. So, like I said, this is what's happening all over the world right now. And this is what's happening right now. So, like again, I got to bring this back up just one more time here. I'm going to go back to Matthew 24 because, like I said, people, they try so hard to deny that this book is the truth. But what you're seeing in the world right now is exactly what Jesus described. Let's go back here to Matthew 24. What he said to you? He says that, see that you are not troubled, that these things must come to pass. And what are these things? You're going to hear about wars and rumors of wars. We have multiple wars and rumors of wars happening right now. Nation is going to rise against nation. Kingdoms are going to rise against kingdoms. There's going to be famines. We're talking about food shortages, pestilence. There's already been a COVID epidemic, earthquakes. I'm pretty sure you guys have paid attention to earthquakes already. And what he's saying is that these are only the beginning of the sorrow. So what Jesus is saying here is that if you want to know whether you're in the end times or not, these are the things that you should be looking out for. And as you can see here, these are the things that are already happening in our world right now. So I guess we can kind of wrap this whole thing up by saying this, is that I don't know when the tribulation is going to happen. Nobody knows when the tribulation is going to happen. Could be 2 years, could be 5 years, could be 10 years. I mean, they're saying that Islam is going to be the number one religion by 2050. Could be then. We don't exactly know. But if you don't know what to look for, and there's a lot of people who just don't know what to look for because they're not in the Word of God. They don't believe in the Bible. They think that this is all hocus pocus and hogwash. So they're not even looking at the subtle warning signs that have been warned about. So they're just living in a completely different world, blinded by what's happening. And when you just follow the current thing, when you're just that guy on social media following the current thing, you have absolutely no idea what exactly you're following. And you can see here, there's a lot of people who are right now, even though the Antichrist hasn't revealed himself yet, they are already prepping themselves to be on the side of the Antichrist when it's all said and done, and they have absolutely no idea about what is coming. But what is coming is going to be very, very bad for them if they don't turn to Jesus Christ and repent now. Because look, talk about the rapture, you talk about the tribulation. There are going to be people saved in the tribulation. There will be people who turn to the true Jesus Christ in the tribulation. However, the tribulation, I like to call it as the 2-minute warning of our world. It's like if you're not in there from that final 2 minutes, you may not have another opportunity after the fact. And we're rapidly getting there where a lot of people want to admit they're not. So Johnny, I'll give you the final word here based on the things that we've talked about here. Kind of what's your take on the whole Israel and Hamas conflict, and are we looking at essentially a test run of the end times here?
Man, some people might consider this a test run, but it really doesn't even come close to what the tribulation is going to be like.
Mhm.
One of the first things, like the first few seals of Revelation, one of them is world war. So as we see the United States sending warships, China sending warships over the area, Iran getting involved, with all of its proxies and even like with just more military equipment. And then the result of all that in the tribulation is going to be a quarter of the earth dies. And that's
Yeah.
2 billion people in very, very short order. We've seen a few thousand, maybe 10,000 die in this conflict so far. That is such a small percentage of 2 billion people. And like you said, like the signs are here. Jesus says like a fig tree, uh, you know, bears its leaves and stuff like that before summer comes. So also you're gonna know the season of the coming of the Son of Man, but you're not gonna know the day or the hour. Um, and he goes on to say in Matthew 24, the last days are gonna be like the days of Noah. You know,
Mhm.
one interesting thing, the last thing I want to point out is I'm going to share my screen for this one, so make sure no one thinks I'm capping here. Genesis 6:13. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Okay, let's go down to what's the word for violence? Hamas. The world is filled with Hamas. What were all those people supporting, protesting all around the world, every major
Mhm.
city of the world? They were pro Hamas. They were
Yep.
saying they're pro Palestinians,
But
but
we know that's all they're pro Hamas.
right. And the Antichrist, he's the god of, or he worships the god of strongholds. He worships military might. That's violence. That's Hamas. And so we're in the days of Noah. We just, we talked about, I think we talked about the Nephilim and, the gene editing and stuff kind of, making our days kind of like the days of Noah. When the whole world started protesting for Hamas, we took a huge step towards being like the days of Noah. And then what happens in the days of Noah? For as in the days before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. Who's Noah in our day? The Gentiles that believe in Jesus. Well, everyone that believes in Jesus. We're going to enter the ark. And they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man. Again, we're not going to know the day or the hour, but Noah knew the signs. He was in direct connection with God. He was preaching that the flood was coming. We're doing the same right here. And here's to, not being in the flood, because that's going to be a tough
Yeah.
one.
Like I said, I mean, you're not gonna be like I said. So many people were like, "No, the church has replaced Israel." It's like, guys, trust me, you do not want to be in the tribulation while it happens. I know some of you guys are so prideful that you think, "No, I need to suffer in the tribulation in order to show that I'm a real Christian." It's like, no, I don't think so. I think you guys are setting yourself up for something that's not gonna work out in your favor the way you think that you are. I know a lot of people think that, oh, it's gonna be another crusade and we're gonna fight on the front lines. It's like that's not how this is gonna go down. Like, my guy, I hate to break this to you, because without Jesus Christ here on earth, things are not going to end very well for you during that time period. And like I said, we're seeing a lot of it right now, and all I can tell people is like, look, read your Bible. I would personally prefer you start with the Gospels, the four books: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Read those first because those are kind of pivotal, and then go back and read through the entire New Testament, and then read the entire Old Testament, because things are happening right now that have been prophesied in the Bible for many, many years. These prophecies were written well before anyone that you can possibly ever think of in your lineage were ever born. And you're seeing them play out right now. And because so many people are completely blind to it, is because they don't know the Bible, they don't know the scriptures, and they have absolutely no idea what is coming. And we're trying to warn you guys right now. We don't know exactly when this is all going to start, but it's looking like it could start soon. And while you're here, you have an opportunity to be saved. While you're here, you have an opportunity to avoid what's coming next. But the only way you're going to avoid what's coming next is to pursue the Jesus Christ of the Bible, not the Jesus Christ of the Quran, because that Jesus Christ is going to lead you to the pits of everlasting fire, not the salvation of Jesus Christ. Follow the God of the Bible, and then only He is going to save you from what comes next. It's not going to be Christian nationalism that saves us. Only Jesus Christ is going to save us from what happens next. That's pretty much what we view generally. So if you're asking from a Christian perspective, how should we view this conflict between Israel and Hamas? It's not really about picking a side right now between Israel or Hamas. It's understanding who the players of this game is. You have to understand that God has a plan for everyone involved. And instead of trying to decide whether I need to support the current state of Israel or support Hamas or Palestine, you need to be on the right side of God right now. That's whose side you need to be on.
Amen.
So there you go. And I think for next week, we're going to take a little bit of a pause because, look, if you look back at some of the topics that we've talked about here in the first few weeks of this show, you can say that it's a little bit of a black pill. You can say this a Monday night black pill stream versus our Wednesday night black pill stream. So, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and flip the switch next week, next Monday night on this show. I'm going to give us an all white pill. I'm going to give us all the ultimate white pill. We're going to talk about heaven next week on the show, episode 16, and we're going to talk about how the Bible describes life in heaven to be. And trust me, you're not going to want to miss this episode, because not only are we going to tell you exactly what heaven is going to look like, what heaven is going to be like for believers of Jesus Christ, but how exactly you get to heaven. That's all going to be a very important episode next week here on this show. So until then, I'm going to give my good buddy Johnny here the floor to promote anything that he has coming up here. So what do you got for the people, man?
Honestly, just have more black pill material. I'm talking about the Gog and Magog war coming up here on godsrevealed.substack.com. Kind of doing a deep dive on that. And you know, a lot of people focus on the Gog and Magog war only taking Ezekiel 38 and 39 like on its own little island and forgetting the context of all the way going back to Ezekiel 33 and all the way to the end to Ezekiel 48. I'm putting kind of all that into perspective and kind of just making it make sense. And so hopefully you will come check that out on godsreveal.substack.com.
All right, and letting you guys know what I got coming up. So as you can see here, there's nothing really behind me because I'm in the middle of a move right now, which should take place later on this week. But we do have one more stream before that move takes place. Tomorrow night, episode 71 of the Barroom Podcast. We're going to talk about how Stranger Things star Millie Bobby Brown says she became a feminist because a psychic told her so. So we're going to talk about that story tomorrow night. Producers are promising a modern day reboot for James Bond. We'll talk about that. Impact decided to change his name back to TNA for no reason whatsoever. Brie Larson is done with Captain Marvel. And then we're going to talk about the Daily Wire and whether they're blowing a golden opportunity to be a true alternative from Hollywood if they're just going to essentially meme everything that Disney is doing. So we'll talk about that tomorrow night on the show. There will be no Friday Night Movie Club this week because I'll be completing things for the move this week. So there won't be no Friday Night Movie Club this week. But in 2 weeks, next Friday, we will be back. And we're going to bring a bunch of people on to watch the film Chasing Poppy on the Friday Night Movie Club. That'll be on Rumble and our Twitch stream next Friday. And then next Monday, we'll be back here, episode 16 of the Bible Lens podcast to talk about heaven. So there you go. So for everyone who joined us throughout our show tonight, Duke Nukem, Kate, who else do we have on here? Awesome One, Justin. I want to make sure that I get everyone on here as well. We had Joseph, who was on our Rumble account. I forgot the name of the podcast for a second there, but we got Jason, who was on our Rumble account, and everyone else who joined us here tonight. Thank you. Hopefully we'll see you guys tomorrow night for the bar room, and we're going to end this show with the gospel of Jesus Christ given by Vodi Bakum. So until then, adios, and we will see you guys hopefully next week. There you guys.
When people say, no, our problem is this, our problem is that, we say, no, our problem is that God created the world. And God created man, and he put man in the garden to keep the garden, and he gave the man a command. And he held that man to perfect, perpetual obedience to that command, and he promised him life if he kept it, and death if he didn't. And he didn't keep it, he ate. And because he ate, because of that one man, sin entered the world, and death through sin. And everyone born from that man through ordinary generation inherited that man's sin nature. And because of that sin nature, sins proceed from it. And our world is broken because of that sin. And we stand guilty before a holy and righteous God. And we know that he's holy, and we know that he's righteous, and we crave justice. But the problem is that if God gives us justice, we all die. And so that God, in his goodness and in his mercy, sent forth his son, who was not born of ordinary generation, but was born of a virgin. Yes, the virgin birth matters. Why? Because if he's born of ordinary generation, he's born in sin. But because he's not born of ordinary generation, he's not born in sin. He's clean of sin. His record is clean. And he keeps his record clean. And he obeys God's law. And because he's fully God and fully man, he obeys the law of God on our behalf in his active obedience. And then in his passive obedience, God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. All we like sheep had gone astray. Each of us had turned to his own way, but God laid upon him the iniquity of us all. And Christ died for sin once for all, the just for the unjust. And God imputes our sinfulness to him. And he nails our sinfulness to the tree. And Christ dies and raises again on the third day for our justification. And there's another imputation. The righteousness of Christ is actually imputed to us so that God can be both just and the justifier of the one who places faith in Jesus Christ. So that all those who come to Christ may enter in. So that all those who place faith in Christ might be saved, but not only saved, but sanctified. Because he's the firstborn of many brethren. We're justified and we're adopted into the family of God. And we're sanctified, and as his children, we begin to bear the family resemblance. And we're further sanctified throughout this life by the very same gospel that saves us. Until one day, when it's all said and done, we're not just saved from the penalty of sin. We're not just saved from the power of sin, but one day we're glorified and saved from the very presence of sin. That's the gospel that we preach. That's the gospel that we need. And that's the gospel that's more than enough.